Over the past few months on Extremely Strange, I've told some really weird and bizarre stories. Some have happy endings, and others, not so much. But tonight's story, while it does contain elements of dark humor, also contains some very graphic and disturbing details, so viewer discretion is advised. George Carl Tanzler was born on February 8, 1877, in Dresden, Germany, and that is the sum total of what is known of him. The rest of his life is steeped in ambiguity, falsities, and embellishments. Chief among his self claims is that of a world traveler who, upon settling in Australia for a 10-year period in the early 1900s, was employed as an electrician and engineer, owned a number of boats, designed and built a plane capable of transoceanic flight, and at one point purchased a private island in the South Pacific. He would go on to write in his memoirs that during his childhood in Germany and later while traveling in Genoa, Italy, he had experienced visions of a deceased ancestor turned poltergeist, the Countess Anna Constantia von Kassel, who would show him the face of his true love, a dark-haired, exotic-looking woman. That is, while the Countess wasn't setting fire to curtains and levitating tables at the family castle. During World War I, Tanzler was placed in a concentration camp with prisoners of war and other undesirable aliens from India and China by the British military for, in his words, safekeeping. He was later moved to Trial Bay in New South Wales, into a castle prison situated on its imposing cliffs, and at the end of the war was sent to the prisoners' exchange in Holland, as those held in camps were not allowed to return to their former homes. Upon his release, he set out in search of his mother, whom he had not contacted since the beginning of the war. When they were reunited, he spent 3 years with her and around 1920 married Doris Schaefer, who gave birth to 2 children, Aisha and Clarissa, who sadly died of diphtheria at the age of 10. Concerned for her son's future in post-World War I Germany, she encouraged him to leave for the United States, where he would join his sister. It was then, in 1926, that he sailed from Rottingham to Havana, Cuba. From there, he settled in Zephyr Hills, Florida, where his sister had emigrated. Doris and their 2 daughters would eventually join him. Their reunion was short-lived, however, as he left his family in 1927 to take a job as a radiology technician and bacteriologist at the U.S. Marine Hospital in Key West. By then, he was going by the name Count Karl von Kassel. He claimed to possess 9 various degrees, be a former submarine captain, and a genius inventor, and not a damn one of those things were true. Fine, you're hired. It was here that the story now took a bizarre turn, as it was there that he met a beautiful, dark-haired, exotic 19-year-old young woman named Maria Elena Milagro de Hoyos, a former entertainer and the daughter of a prominent Key West cigar maker, Francisco, and his wife, Aurora. Elena had already been married to one Luis Mesa, who had abandoned her and moved to Miami after she had miscarried the couple's first child. She herself had contracted tuberculosis and came to the hospital for treatment for this otherwise, at this point in time, fatal disease. Tanzler was immediately smitten by the woman and was convinced she was the vision presented to him by the spectral matchmaker Countess von Kassel. Taking a keen interest in her case and using every bit of medical knowledge, both real and imagined, that he possessed, he attempted to treat Elena with a host of medicines, elixirs, and X-ray and electrical equipment, going so far as to illegally bring them to Elena's home, where she had returned to live out her final weeks. One homemade contraption was designed to charge her oxygen electrons with electrodes, which he had convinced himself would save her. Despite her excruciating agony, her parents gave their approval of these treatments, likely out of desperation. Despite her failing condition, von Kassel began a courtship of her, ravishing her with clothing and jewelry and professing his undying love for her. It's quite safe to assume she did not share those same feelings with this weirdo, and she rebuked his many marriage proposals, claiming to technically still be married, him being far too old for her, and, oh, by the way, dying of an incurable disease. But von Kassel was not to be deterred by something as trivial as unrequited love. Eventually, the family grew tired of Van Kassel's unwanted attentions on their daughter and sister and forbade him to visit. They even moved to a new home, but Van Kassel found them anyway, and likely because of her advancing illness, allowed him to visit her one last time. On October 25, 1931, the inevitable took place as Maria Elena died from tuberculosis at her parents' home. Stricken with grief, Tanzler paid for the funeral and asked for and received permission to erect an above-ground mausoleum in Key West City Cemetery, where she was to be buried. It was there, at her final resting place, or so we thought, that Tanzler visited her most every night. He also made a bizarre request that she be placed in an airtight casket with an incubator tank full of formaldehyde to prevent decay. While it was being constructed, he paid off the funeral director so he could spend time with Elena's body. It's also been said he had a telephone line installed inside her tomb in the event they wanted to continue their long-distance romance. Hi. What you doing? Hello? Hello? Okay, so the whole airtight casket, telephone to the dead, formaldehyde thing, that sounds like a roadmap to where we're headed here. You're getting too far ahead of me. Somewhere in this time frame, his grieving turned toward the macabre, when, as he later said, Elena's spirit would speak to him, saying she had consented to marry him and pleading to be removed from her tomb. On other occasions, he claimed she would sing her favorite song, La Boda Negra, to him whenever he visited her. La Boda Negra translates to the Black Wedding, and it's about a man that steals the corpse of a woman he loved. Told you, don't get ahead of me, stay with me here. His visit stopped in 1933, which puzzled Elena's relatives, but there was a reason for that. Von Kassel's descent into grotesque madness culminated in him sneaking through the cemetery in April of 1933 and entering the mausoleum, removed Elena's corpse from her tomb and made off with it, carrying it on a toy wagon through the cemetery. The grave robbery did not go as planned, as the decomposing corpse, despite efforts of preservation, proved a great challenge to hoist over the cemetery fencing. Covered in putrescence, he later bathed in whiskey to try to remove the stench. Successfully getting her back to a rooming house and only now coming to a complete understanding of the poor condition of her body, Carl used the wingless cosmic space plane called the Comtessa he was constructing on the grounds of the hospital where he worked to transport the body to a dilapidated shack on the beach. There he began efforts to essentially reconstruct her, attaching her bones together with piano wire and fitting her with glass eyes. He addressed skin decomposition by creating a concoction of silk cloth soaked in a combination of wax and plaster of Paris. Her hair was replaced with a wig fashioned from her own hair he had procured from her mother. Señora Hoyos, ¿no pensaste que era un pocorero? No? Ay, Her abdominal and chest cavities were filled with rags to stabilize her form, and she was dressed in stockings, jewelry, and gloves, and kept in Tonsler's bed. Copious amounts of perfumes, disinfectants, and preserving solutions were used to mask the stench and delay the body's inevitable continuing decomposition. Legend has it that Karl attempted to reanimate the body using ultraviolet rays, and when that failed, he made plans to transport her with the Comtessa into the stratosphere, where cosmic rays would revive her from the dead, and they could put the whole sordid mess behind them. His efforts apparently did not include hiding his depravity from the public, as he was seen dancing in front of windows with a dead body, and rumors of, let's say, a very unusual and intimate relationship that was taking place. Oh, God. 7 years later, repeat, 7 years later, the stories reached Maria's sister Florinda, who went to Tonsler's home with Elenia's estranged husband Mario to confront him. It was there she discovered the gruesome sight of her sister's body lying in Tonsler's bed, with an otherwise beaming von Kassel displaying immense pride in his preservation efforts. Florinda didn't share his excitement and contacted the authorities, who immediately placed him under arrest. After a psychiatric examination, pretty much a no-brainer at that point, he was found competent to stand trial and was charged with wantonly and maliciously destroying a grave and removing a body without authorization, because apparently stealing a corpse wasn't illegal in Key West at that time. I hope they amended that since then. Anyway, moving on. Unfortunately, the statute of limitations on whatever the hell they could get him on had expired, and the charges had to be dismissed. But if you thought he was just happy not to rot away his life in prison, you'd be wrong. He brazenly asked the judge if he could somehow find his way to allow him to take Elenia's body back home with him, to which the judge was said to have lost his goddamn mind. The judge decreed that Elenia be buried in an unmarked grave, the location of which was to remain undisclosed to thwart any future attempts of the ghoulish count to exhume her again. Unfortunately, the location wasn't shared with the Hoyas family either. Soon afterwards, Elenia's tomb was blown to bits by dynamite. Even though no one was formally charged with the crime, no one could ever think von Kassel, in a fit of rage, wasn't at least capable of this. As you can imagine, the entire state of Florida was abuzz when this shit show became public, and because Florida and people in general are weird, Tonsler found himself the object of a great deal of empathy, as the crazy hopeless romantic who just wanted to spend eternity with the woman he loved. And so what if he went full weekend at Bernie's to do so? Now, if that doesn't make you want to take a hot shower and wash all of this away, this might. A public viewing of Elenia's body at the Dean Lopez Funeral Home in Key West was arranged, with almost 7,000 people lining up to pay to have a glimpse of this poor woman turned mannequin. And local schools were even let out early so children could take advantage of this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to have a close-up look at a life-size porcelain doll. With no money or job prospects, Karl moved back to Zephyr Hills to live closer to his wife and daughter, who, believe it or not, took him back in and supported him the rest of his life. Von Kassel died on July 3rd, 1952, alone and still grieving for his lost love. His body was discovered 3 weeks after his death. A diary he kept bore the following words: "Human jealousy has robbed me of the body of my Elenia, yet divine happiness is flowing through me, for she has survived death. Forever and ever, she is with me." When his body was discovered, so was a life-size death mask of Elenia, found in the same room as him. Like Elenia, Carl was buried in an unmarked grave so as to deter anyone from messing with his corpse. Ironic, isn't it? So, if true love is indeed eternal, one has to wonder if this relationship, tenuous at best, has survived in the afterlife. Or is Elenia finally free of the unwanted attention and desecration of her final resting place? It's been said that Elenia Hoyo's ghost haunts the funeral home of Bahama Lane. Let's hope they're mistaken about that and that Elenia has finally found peace in her newest grave.